on behalf of the DeKalb County History Center and the DeKalb County Forest Preserve District, and we are at the Miller Ellwood Cabin. And the cabin is one of the historical treasures of DeKalb County. It's 185 years old. It was one of the first buildings built by European settlers and the pioneers in DeKalb County, and it's connected to people who had a lot of influence and a lot of power in DeKalb County over the years. So we're going to talk about a little bit about who the people were that built the cabin, how they built it, what's happened in and around the cabin over the years, and then we'll talk a little bit about what the plans are for now and into the future with this cabin and how to keep it as the treasure that it is. The cabin was donated to the DeKalb County Forest Preserve District by the Ellwood Tolles family. And those of you from DeKalb County might recognize the name Ellwood. Isaac Ellwood and his wife Harriet were the people who started the barbed wire company that was supposedly tamed the West and put DeKalb on the map as far as a center for industry and culture with the university and all of it. So the family who originally settled here, though, were Bill and Patience Miller. William was his name, but it seems like from the letters that we've been able to see, everybody called him Bill. They were an ambitious couple and hardy. You had to be hardy to settle out here in pioneer times when it was just a wilderness. There was not much of anything here but trees and prairie and wild animals and not much even in the way of roads. There were no automobiles, no airplanes, no trains, no buses, no cars. There were no cell phones. There was even hardly any mail originally. So this was the kind of place you would only come to if you were a hardy, dedicated pioneer wanting to make your way in what was then the West. This is the cabin as it was constructed in 1835. Bill and Patience Miller came out of the Finger Lakes region of New York. If you don't know the Finger Lakes, they're a bunch of rather large lakes laid out in lines like a set of fingers in western New York. We don't know exactly how they got here. They could have come by Conestoga wagon. They could have come by keel boat down the Ohio and up the Mississippi, Illinois rivers. Maybe somebody knows that, but I don't. What we do know is that they got here in 1835, and they settled in this area exactly a mile south of where the cabin is now located. We think that the Millers hired a crew while they were here to help them with the cabin, just partly by the shape and the direction and the differerences in the adze marks on the outside of the logs, outside and inside the logs that the cabin is made of. We also have some records of the letters that were sent back and forth between the Millers and their family back in New York that talk about what was happening with them here at the time they were first settling. And those are some fascinating letters and very helpful as far as establishing how the cabin was first constructed. The cabin's made of white oak logs with walnut door and window frames. The cabin was mostly pinned together at the doors and windows, but the logs are simply just stacked on one another in the English style, where the corners are notched so they kind of fit on top of one another. And those weren't pinned at all; they're just laid like that. But for 185 years, they've lain there pretty steadily until we moved them 10 years ago. And between the logs, they were chinked with mud and clay from the Kishwaukee River that kept the wind from blowing through between the logs. The logs were laid butt end against butt end, one over the other, because trees are a little bigger at the bottom than they are at the top, and they had to make it balance out as we got up into the top of the logs. So the cabin was originally about a mile straight south of here, and there is some oral history that says the cabin was originally even closer to the river, but it was in a flood-prone area and was moved early on in its early days. We don't have any record of that, but there is an oral history from the Nelson family, who lived in the cabin for decades. It was added on to as a farmhouse, so it was a much larger building. But there's that oral history that was handed down over the decades that it was actually located somewhat further closer to the river, but in an area that was prone to flooding. So if you look at the cabin, you'll notice there are little metal tags that are still on the corner of each log. These tags were put on, each one has a separate number, and they were put on there to keep track of what log went where when we reconstructed the cabin after we disassembled it and stored it for a year. So this is corner 3, log 10, and so forth. Each one of these tells us where this log goes in what part of the structure of the building. These logs are all white oak, and the pioneers used white oak as much as they could to build their cabins, because white oak has little tissues in the cells that transport water and nutrients up and down inside the trunk of the tree, unlike many other woods. So white oak lasts a lot longer in protecting the cabin from deterioration, because water doesn't get into the wood as easily. And in fact, barrels are almost, whiskey barrels and wine barrels are all made out of some kind of white oak because they hold water so well. The logs were adzed on 2 sides, and an adze, A-D-Z, is a kind of an axe with the blade turned sideways and bent a little bit. And the idea of an adze is to cut layers of the wood off and to flatten it. These logs are flattened on 2 sides. They're all about 5 inches thick, and they're flattened on the front and on the inside, the outside and the inside, but they didn't even bother to knock the bark off of the bottom and the top. We think probably they left the bark on so that the chinking would hold well between the logs. The chinking was supposed to hold keep the moisture and the wind out of the cabin. This adze is used kind of like this. You stand on a log, you aim real well, and you shave a thin layer of wood off of the log. Okay, so whether you're traveling in a Conestoga wagon or on a keelboat or on horseback, you just can't carry very much with you. So these are examples of some of the kinds of tools that early settlers and pioneers would have brought with them to be able to build a cabin like this. While these tools look very old, they're not near as old, and they're not exactly like the tools that the millers would have had when they built their cabin. Here's just an axe, which was used for downing trees and for cutting the logs to shape. This is a large saw. They would have used a large saw to cut out the windows and the doors, but to get this saw in the logs before they would cut out the windows and the doors, they had to use an auger. And this is a hand-made auger. It's a hand-operated drill that they would use to drill a series of holes large enough. They drill a series of holes close together and then chisel out the wood between the holes, and then stick their saw in there and saw out the spots for the windows and the doors. It was much easier than trying to stack the logs with the doors and windows in place. These are some examples of this. These are actually the original pieces of the original chinking, that was the mud that was put between all the logs to keep the wind and the weather out. It's just kind of yellow Kishwaukee riverbank clay. It's got some sand and gravel in it, and has little bits of horsehair in there. And the hair is very, very fine. That's because it was the winter layer of underbelly hair that the horses would put on during the cold months and then shed in the spring. The pioneers and settlers would gather that, mix it with the mud to kind of hold the mud together in the chinking. This cabin only survives because very soon after it was built, within a period of probably just a few years, the outside of the cabin was covered with clapboards. The Miller family, they were pretty well off when they got here probably, and they were very ambitious and hardworking, and they acquired enough money to be able to add on to this house pretty early on. Additions. So there were 2 layers of lath and plaster. That's the old-fashioned kind of drywall that's on the inside of homes on the walls. And there were clapboards, just regular boards, siding boards on the outside of the cabin that had to be removed before we could move the logs to the site it's at now. Here are some of the oak pins that were used to pin the doors and the windows to the logs themselves. These are shims, and these are all original pieces. These are shims that were used to kind of jam the logs and kind of hold them in place until the chinking was in there and dried. These are square nails. By the time this cabin was built, the settlers were using actually machine-made nails to put the roof and the smaller pieces of wood that were assembled in the cabin. And here's a piece of one of the original roof boards. And you can see it's very wide. It was a big wide board. This may be one of the boards that came from Yorkville. And if you look at the saw marks in here, they're straight up and down, straight up and down. So it wasn't a circular blade that cut this. It was either a sawmill, which was water powered and had a wheel that was pushed by the water, flowing water from a mill pond, and they had a little channel called a race that would run from the pond to the big water wheel that would turn some gears and turn a shaft and then push a cam. The cam would make a big flat blade, kind of like on the saw there, go up and down and up and down, and it was a very tedious process of pushing a log through that up and down sawing process to get boards like this. These are pieces of the original bark from the logs that were in the cabin. As I said previously, they would leave the bark on the logs on the top and the bottom, probably to help reduce the amount of work, but probably to help the chinking stick to the logs in those spaces between the logs. So let's go inside now and talk a little bit about what the cabin looks like from the inside. Okay, here we are inside the Miller Ellwood cabin. As you can see, it's a little dim in here, and that's the way it would pretty much always be. Cabins didn't have a lot of windows in them. In fact, right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 windows in there. They probably didn't have 5 in here to start with, because they would always leave the west side of the cabin wall without a window or a door. This door was added because we had to have dual doors for access for the public, access and exit for the public to be able to do tours here. But windows and doors were added over the years as the cabin became part of a much larger building. So as we disassembled the cabin to move it here, after we took off the 2 layers of lath and plaster and the furring strips, the upright boards that the lath was nailed to, behind each furring strip we found newspaper. They had put newspaper, very much like wallpaper, all over the inside of the cabin at some point before they put the lath and plaster on. And on the newspaper, you can see remnants of it here still, a few on the wall. We found dates from the newest one was August of 1843, and the oldest one was June 12th of 1837, and that was from the Chicago Democrat newspaper, which went out of business right before the Civil War, and the owner of it sold his subscription list and his equipment to what became the Chicago Tribune magazine. So the Miller Ellwood cabin, and Miller and Ellwood are 2 last names, William and Patience Miller and Ellwood, Isaac and Harriet Ellwood. And how that came about was that Isaac Ellwood was actually a hired man for the Miller family back when they were still farming the property around here, and he married the boss's daughter. And so this farmstead, this cabin, has been in the same family since from 1835 until the Ellwood Tolles family donated this cabin to the Forest Preserve District. Now, Bill and Harriet Miller lived here for from 1835 till the 1850s, perhaps, when they moved into DeKalb, and then Isaac and Harriet Ellwood lived in the cabin. But it wasn't a cabin when they lived here. By then, it had a number of different rooms added onto it. It had a porch where I'm standing, and it had a painted clapboard exterior over probably 4 or 5 rooms in addition to what was the room that the cabin was inside. The farming of the area around here was carried out by first Bill Miller, who was the first person to bring in 10 acres of corn in Kingston Township here in DeKalb County. After that, the Millers had farms that they purchased from clear Geneva, Illinois, through DeKalb County and clear up into areas near Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. So they were very successful people. Bill Miller had 2 cabins, Bill Miller had 2 mills on the Kishwaukee River. One about a mile south of here. It was originally a sawmill mill where they would saw logs into boards, and then a grist mill where they would grind grain into flour. He had another mill about 3 miles south of here on the Kishwaukee River, and they had a general store in Kingston or Genoa. I don't remember which. They were very successful people, and when the Ellwoods finally moved out of the farmhouse, it was the cabin and the house and the buildings. The cabin and the rooms that surrounded it became the home of the farm managers, and one family, the Nelsons, have been the farm managers for over 100 years, and they helped us with the disassembly and the moving the cabin to this site. And they still farm the land adjacent to the property here. So the cabin now serves a different purpose than it did for 175 years. It's now a historical artifact that's used by the people of the county, the children and adults, visitors to the forest preserves that surround the cabin here, as an educational tool. We expect that the cabin will continue to be developed. The porch will be put back on and the interior decorated with period items at some point in time. But for now and into the future, what we expect the cabin to do is be an initiator of curiosity among the residents of our county about the fascinating history that's taken place here over the last 185 years. There have been so many changes. DeKalb County is so different from what it was like 185 years ago when the first settlers came here. But there's another story that goes back far before that, where the land around here was changed dramatically by other people who settled here 10,000 years ago. But we'll talk about that another time. So if you're interested in learning more about DeKalb County's history, about the history of the cabin, or if you'd like to tour the site, you can check in the website of the DeKalb County History Center, and you can arrange a tour. Or you can talk to the DeKalb County Forest Preserve District and tour the South Branch Prairie, which is right behind us right now, Russell's Forest Preserve, and the Hoppy Heritage Farmstead that's right behind us. So thank you for being on our virtual tour here today, and we hope you're interested enough to come visit the site on your own sometime. Bye for now.